Today, my guest is Bridget Krone. Bridget is the author of this fantastic book. I'm going to talk to her about it and about the title, because the title is quite a mouthful. The Cedarville Shop and the Wheelbarrow Swap. Bridget Krone, welcome, and thank you very much for joining me today. And congratulations on your second book. That seems to be doing really well.
Thanks, Izak. Thanks for having me. Yes, the title is quite a mouthful, but it's quite fun. And I think it conveys something of the spirit of the book, which is a sort of a fun, it's a fun rollick. It also has serious aspects to it, because I never think that we should condescend to children of this age. They know life is hard, but it has a kind of a lyrical quality to it. The rhyme is sweet, and it was actually the title was arrived at by the publisher. It wasn't my initial idea. I had a couple of pages of titles, and then they all got one by one. They got overturned, and the publisher came up with this one, Catalyst Press, and I'm really pleased with it. And I think it looks. It is a mouthful, but it's very sweet, and I think it conveys the fun of the story.
I'm going to unpack the title in a short while, but let's begin by saying that, to me, if I have to summarize it, well, my main summary, I think I've told you about this is about an ox-driven cheese shop, which of course is an oxymoron, but we'll get to that later. But if I have to if I have to summarize the book, I would suggest that this is a fairy tale. However, we do not see any magic in here. We do not see any people with wands. This is very much about human interaction that creates fairy tales, human interaction that creates actually small miracles in the end. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm always drawn to the miracles and the possibilities that exist in everyday moments. I have never been a big fan, although some people do it very well, but I've never really been drawn to magic that swoops in from outside. I really love the magic that people make themselves out of their own everyday circumstances. So that was really important to me, to have a redemptive story. I mean, you have to have that for children. You can't write a very sad story that goes nowhere. There has to be some hope and some life and some love and some joy in it. And it's all the better, I think, if that arises from everyday things that we all have at our disposal. So you're absolutely right. No fairies, no magic, no wizards, but a lot of magic anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the opposite would be something like Harry Potter, where you have people going abracadabra or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved Harry Potter. There's nothing wrong with that. But this is exactly this is exactly the this is all about human interaction. Now, you mentioned right at the start that when you write for kids, kids know that life is hard. This is a very South African book. There's no doubt about that. It's a truly South African book. There are RDP houses. There's a lot of people that are without jobs. I mean, the town Cedarville is well, I'll talk about Cedarville in a moment, but I mean, it's actually it's a small town. It's actually a sad little town in the Eastern Cape. And yet within this community, there's a little boy whose name, by the way, is important. He comes up with a brilliant plan. But let's just, for a moment, before we come to the boy, I want to ask about Cedarville. Why on earth would anybody choose a town like Cedarville? I mean, I happened to drive past Kokstad the other day, and so I have a pretty good idea. I mean, I was there a few times now for various reasons. I've got a pretty good idea where Cedarville is, but I mean, very few people in the world would find Kokstad on a map. And Cedarville is this tiny little place where, if you don't know, where your looking glasses are, you won't even find it on the map. Why situate a story that actually this book has gone international? I'll talk about that later. But why situate the story in Cedarville of all places?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm always drawn to that, to the most unlikely places that harbor this kind of magic that I referred to earlier. And in fact, I talk. There's a subtle theme of grace that runs through the book, which I understand. I know it has its theological meaning of God's, that we of undeserved favor. But the way I interpret it here is that kind of thing, that where things line up in such a way, and there's something wonderful and miraculous and redemptive. But the place of Cedarville, it was very, very dear to me. I grew up on a farm just a few kilometers outside of Cedarville, and so the village itself is very familiar to me. I know all the places that are referred to in the story. I know the layout of the town very, very well as the back of my hand. And when I was asked many years ago, actually, to write a book, I really felt very strongly that I wanted to locate it, use the setting of Cedarville. And so I went to the village, and I had a little notebook, and I walked around interviewing people and trying to get a feel for the place and some of the issues and some of the things that concerned the people who lived there. And I encountered so much hardship. People had tales of just endless suffering and difficulty, of unemployment, grinding poverty, a lot of illness, HIV, AIDS, TB, just so much hardship. And I came away with a really heavy heart, because I felt like I felt strongly that I wanted to use this as a setting for a story, but I couldn't find the redemption. I just couldn't see how I was going to get it to work, especially for children. So I've learned now that one of the things I do is just I've learned to tolerate not knowing about something. So I for honestly about 3 weeks I just sat with it and thought, well, if there's a story to be told here, I'll find it eventually, I'm sure. But it didn't appear. And one day I, in desperation, actually Googled crazy ideas and thought, well, when maybe the solution to this problem lies in the internet. And I went through the first page and nothing jumped out at me. The second page, nothing jumped out at me. Buried somewhere in the third page was this story of the real story of the Canadian man, Kyle MacDonald, who wanted a house, couldn't afford one, and decided on this mad idea of trading on the internet. And he started with a red paperclip, which was sitting on his desk. And it took him a year and about 14 trades. And he did go from a red paperclip to a house. He actually did get a house. And so the minute I read that story, something about it just kind of spoke to me. And I knew immediately that I had the story that would provide the little engine for my story, which I really wanted, and I really wanted it to be redemptive. So I had my little character whose name is Boipelo, which in Sesotho means proud, but I like the shortened version of it, boy, because it's sort of every boy, it's any boy who's ever had a dream, a big dream. And he reads this real story of Kyle MacDonald and the red paperclip, and that all happened in Canada. And something about that story did for him what it did for me when I read it on the internet. And he thinks, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get a better house. I'm going to trade, and I'm going to start this process. And how hard can it be? If Kyle MacDonald can do it, I can do it too.
Yeah. No, I just want to actually stop you for a moment, because I mean, again, I mean, there's a lovely reason why Boipelo actually comes across the story. He's a reader. I think that is important, because had he not been a reader, and because he's a reader, had he not had to read to his granny, he would have missed the story altogether. So being a reader is part of that human aspect of somebody in desperation, still actually looking after himself. I mean, what a lovely idea. But
Yes.
in other words, the story about the red paperclip is very much part of the book, as you say, it's the engine. So just a brief moment. Is that a true story? I mean, I was wondering about that.
Absolutely.
So
That is
that
a
truly
true
happened.
story. That really, really
Somebody
happened.
really
And
picked
of
up a
course,
red paperclip, and he eventually got himself a house.
he did. And he used the internet. I think the first thing he traded for was a pen shaped like a fish. And then
Okay.
he went on and traded for something else. And each time he traded, it had to be of a higher value than
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
thing that he already possessed. And it took a year. It took quite a lot of publicity. He appeared on a chat show and in America, and he took some risky trades. It wasn't like just a straightforward trajectory, but he generally went upwards, and eventually he got quite a lot of people interested in his idea, and because of that he was offered a house by this small town in Canada called Kipling. And so it really did work, and it really did happen. And of course I had to get permission from Kyle MacDonald to use this idea in my story, which he gave very
Has he read
willingly.
your book?
I don't know if he's read it, no, but I did describe to him what I would be using his idea for, and he
We
said
should
go for it, it's absolutely fine.
we should actually send him a copy of the book,
Oh, absolutely,
because
I'd love for him to read it.
your
Yes,
publishers, the Catalyst, and Catalyst of course is
yes,
American based. They have a South
yes,
African home, which is
yes,
important. They actually trade in both South Africa and in the United States, but we should actually send
yes,
Carl a copy. But let's
indeed,
just get back to Boipelo, because Boipelo
yes,
lives in Cedarville, and with all due
yes,
respect, Cedarville is not known to be the internet hub of the world.
not
And
at all.
that
Not at
actually
all.
is part of the story. Is Boipelo at
Mm.
one stage does know about Google. He actually
Yes,
has access to computers, but as with
yes,
many
yes.
South African schools, it's sort of for a few minutes every few months, and that's the
Yeah, yeah.
reality of South Africa. So
Yes.
online to him means putting things on a line. I mean, it doesn't mean
Yes.
online. And yet
No,
you
indeed.
create this incredible story about a little boy who starts, I mean, he starts with a clay ox. He wants to trade a clay ox, and he wants a better
Yeah, yeah.
house.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, no spoiler alerts to say he did get something of value in the end. I'm not going to tell you how.
Yes.
Please read the
Yes, yes.
book. But the
Yes.
reality is his trades went from up to oh boy, and then up, and then oh dupes, and then
Mm,
eventually
mm, mm.
there are some absolutely hilarious moments. I mean, there's a scene where he's got to pluck and cook a chicken, which is just, I mean, Bridget, it's beyond crazy. Um, I'm not gonna, I mean, that
Mm,
people should read it themselves. It's just hilarious because
yeah,
things go awfully wrong for the poor little boy.
yeah,
But
yeah.
anyway,
Indeed, indeed.
but the reality is, and this brings me back to the miracle is in the end, miracles happen when people make them happen.
Yeah,
I want to take
yeah.
a quick step back to your previous book, because this is you write textbooks for schools, but this is your second book. Your first book is a lovely book called Small Mercies, and it's about a small
Mm,
girl called Mercy, of course. And again, it's about the house that's about to be lost.
mm.
And small Mercy realizes that big dreams happen when small people actually create a voice for themselves. Am I
Yeah.
correct? I mean, is that the correct summary of your
Absolutely.
book?
It's funny you should say that. I haven't ever thought about how much these two books have in common. And obviously, I'm mining a seam here that seems very important to me. And the one is home, the idea of home.
Mm.
Mercy has to rescue her home, and this one is Boipelo trying to create a much more comfortable and better home for himself.
And his
So the
family,
idea of
of
home
course.
is
Yeah,
common for both.
yeah,
And then the other thing that's in common, obviously, is no fairies, just ordinary people making things happen. And yeah, so in that sense, the stories are similar, but they're very different as well.
oh yes,
In
oh yes,
Yeah, I mean, they Mercy has she has to learn to tell the truth about something, and it's a really pivotal moment. And once she tells that truth, and um, she then all sorts of things fall into place for her. And it's also, I've woven in a bit of history into that one of Gandhi, and
Gandhi, exactly. Yeah,
some
yeah.
wonderful things that I discovered about Gandhi and his childhood and his road to glory, which was not straightforward. And he started life very shy and awkward, and as is Mercy, she hates the limelight, and
Yeah.
so it's all about it's about finding your voice, as you say, and again the miracles that happen when ordinary people make them happen. And yeah, so yeah, I've never thought of this two books as so similar in some ways, and they are actually, they both, yeah, deal with similar themes.
To
Yeah,
me,
but
there
in
are
different
lots of
ways.
similarities. The stories, though, as you say, are completely different. I mean,
Yes, yes,
they I wouldn't say opposites, but very, very different.
yeah.
Um, the there is, though, something that I need to get back to, and that is, I mean, Cedarville, as I've already mentioned, is hardly a big town, to be
Yes,
polite.
yeah,
And of course, then Boipelo lives in a community that speaks both Sotho and Xhosa, and
yes.
they live in a. I'm going to try and pronounce it now because thanks to Boipelo's insistence, I think I know Koronkwadi.
Yes,
So,
yes,
so in other words, it's a small town, and he lives in the township of the small town. So
yes,
this is really, I mean, this is about South Africa. We're not dealing here
yeah,
with, it's not an easy life, and there's
yeah.
quite a sad story actually, on page 45 of the book, that deals with if you are poor, your
Mm,
bucket will always leak.
mm,
Um,
mm, mm,
it's a song, and do you perhaps just want to briefly say something about that? Because in
mm.
some ways, that's the reality of Cedarville, but that's also the reality of so many people living in townships in South Africa. If you are poor, your bucket will
Absolutely.
leak.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and
yeah,
and there's a kind of a acceptance that being poor means you are down and out. And somehow
yeah,
Botelho says, no, I'm going to fix
yeah,
my leaky bucket.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
just briefly want to mention that because
yeah, yeah.
that won't give the story away, but it will tell a
No.
little bit about how this boy actually decides to go against all the odds, and he wants
Mm,
to improve
mm,
himself and the town. In
mm,
fact, I mean,
mm.
that's what happens in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think the poverty and the grind, the way poverty grinds away at people is almost a character in the book. It's it's the biggest obstacle that he has to overcome. Um,
Mm.
because everybody around him lives with this poverty. And I came up with the image of the bucket. It's always struck me as that song that we all know, "There's a hole in your bucket, dear Liza, dear
Yes.
Liza."
Yes.
And it's such a silly song because he has to fix the bucket with straw. And when the Boipelo's teacher teaches him this song to try and teach them some English, they all think it's daft because who would mend their bucket with
Exactly.
straw?
Yeah.
Like, well, what a silly thing
Exactly.
to
Yeah. Yeah.
do. Um, but he thinks about it and he realizes that uh, Henry will never fix his bucket because there's a leak in his bucket and he needs water in order to fill it. And his dad, Boipelo's dad, actually, who's very depressed for most of the book, most of the story, because he's unemployed and he feels pretty worthless. He says to Boipelo, life is like a leaky bucket. You'll spend your life trying to fill it, but if there's a hole in the bucket, and there's a hole in our bucket, we will never fill it up because and his life is spent chasing jobs that really deplete him. He'll have to walk 10 kilometers to get a job in the Mvenyani to harvest turnips and 10 kilometers back, and
Mm.
he's got no energy left to go and upskill himself or to apply for a job. He doesn't have a cell phone. His bucket has a hole in it, and he spends his life madly putting water in, but it doesn't go anywhere. And for a while, Boipelo picks up on the despair that's inherent in that, and feels really like he's wasting his time as well. And I think that was something I wanted to convey in the story, um, is that sometimes when you feel so much despair, then often somebody else comes in with a little bit of energy and picks you up and makes it happen. And in Boipelo's case, that's his friend Potso, who comes
Yes.
and says, come, no, we're going to do this. And it's a stupid idea. And Pozzo's very scathing of the whole idea of the he calls it Project Paperclip, and he mocks his friend about it, and that. But he's in the way he acts, he's actually very supportive, and he teases him mercilessly all along, but he's there beside him, and they do it together. And just when Boipelo's feeling such despair, Pozzo comes in and says, right, no, we're going to do this. And he draws another poster. And that was something we sort of omitted earlier when we were talking about the absence of the internet. Boipelo doesn't have the internet to advertise his things. He has to literally make posters, which he sticks up with press stick outside the cafe or the shop.
Yes, the Cedar shop. Yeah.
And so that's his version of the internet. And it's Pozzo who really gives him that little bit of encouragement just when he needs it.
So Pozzo is kind of the friend that you love and the friend you hate, because I mean he is, as you say, he's actually in some ways he laughs himself silly at the stupid idea, but then he says, well, it's so stupid, let's do it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he's just a lovely. I'm very fond of Pozzo. He's such a funny character, and he's such a good friend to Boy. But their friendship is in peril, and that is another theme of the book, is how friendships can go wrong, and how you can get them right. And again, it's not an easy solution. But I think at that age, sort of 10, 11, 12, children are becoming aware of who's talented or who's pulling ahead, and it can create difficulties in friendships. It's quite easy to support a friend when everything's going badly and you all in it together. It's another matter. I think adults even have to cope with this. It's another matter to remain friends when somebody's doing well, and so that's another theme of the book.
I want to actually ask you, because this is something that has tickled me since I read and I was fortunate, I read the manuscript, and I've recently reread the book. But in your mind, what would be the target age group of this book? Because as far as I'm concerned, this is a book for adults as well. But I mean, clearly, you have actually written it with kids in mind. What's your you happen to be? I know that in another life, Bridget Krone writes textbooks for schools, so you know something about schools. And this one, where would you pitch that?
Well, I do think,
apart from adults like Izak, because I think all adults should read it. But I mean, sorry, I'm interrupting you now. Yeah.
No, well, I mean, Izak, if you think about the best children's books, and I mean, I'm not saying mine is up there with them, but at all. But I do think that they have to be psychologically true, And if you think of Maurice Sendak or people like that, there's something they resonate with children and with adults, and I like that. I think children know you can't easily pull the wool over their eyes, and I mean, sure, they want to be entertained and they want silly stories just as we do as well, but I like to write things that feel truthful and real, and I think those will be of interest to anyone of any age. I don't know that I necessarily pull it off, but I think in this book there are short chapters which is aimed at kids. They like that feeling of completion, that they're getting somewhere. They've finished a chapter, especially if they are reluctant readers. The themes are relevant to kids, friendship, dreams, trying to make something happen, making a hell of a mess, having to
terrible mess at times. Oh boy, terrible. It's frightening at sometimes what happens in this book. It's hilarious to the point of shame. But I mean, yes. Anyway,
and that was important to me, actually, to show the mess, because in a way I wanted it to mirror any creative endeavor. It doesn't matter if you're 8
Oh,
or if you're
quite.
80.
Oh, quite.
You start something, you get an idea, you think, oh, this is brilliant. This is really going to work. And you think, well, how hard can this be? And then you start and you realize, oh, it's harder.
It's a mess.
It's harder than I.
Yeah, exactly. I basically, but you're understanding yourself here. You say you don't know whether yours is part of the best. Well, if you don't know, maybe I could say that your previous book, Kirkus, or Small Mercy, was rated by Kirkus as one of the top books in 2020. Now, Kirkus, for those who don't know, I'm speaking to you from South Africa, but a lot of people from the US will know it. Kirkus is, of course, the reviewer of books in the United States. If they say it's one of the best books of 2020, well, maybe they happen to know something. And then in 2021, your previous book, Small Mercies, was listed as one of the outstanding international books. It was put on the outstanding international book list. So, Bridget, not too shabby, I dare say.
It's lovely, actually, and I'm so indebted to Catalyst Press for promoting my book in those areas, because I think as South Africans we don't think we can compare. We don't think we're good enough, and it's just very, very affirming to have this kind of recognition. So I'm really pleased. And I'm very grateful to Catalyst for all the work they do, and kind of saying, hey, we've got one for you. And I think people are pleased also to read a South African book. There are not many books out there. And I mean, that's a topic for a whole nother discussion, but why they aren't, it's complex, I think. But I'm only too delighted if people overseas can read a book about South Africa and get a more nuanced understanding of what this place is about, and people's the way people live, and that it's not a simple matter of horrible white people and oppressed black people. And obviously that's there, and it comes through subtly in this
very
book.
much, very much. Yes,
Shop.
yes, yeah.
The way the white shop owner speaks about poor people is a manifestation of deeply held attitudes that go back to the time of apartheid. So there is there are the shadows of apartheid are still there. The fact that Boy's father lives with such poverty is a direct consequence to apartheid. But
and yet, one of the most lovely things about this book, and if I may, sorry, I'm interrupting, but I think the important thing actually is to say that that's exactly why this book to me is truly wonderful, because it's all there. You say that, but in the end, it was one of those white women that actually saw the benefit of what this young man, and I don't want to say much more because people should read the book, but had it not been for somebody who actually was held with some grudge in the community to say, but this boy has taught me something, and I want to do something in return. And nothing miraculous, once again, just plain and simple, something that actually is workable and will benefit him and the community. But that was the beautiful thing, is we've got the grinding poverty, and then there's hope. I mean, that's just wonderful.
Yeah. Well, it is a kind of a hope that I nurse. For me, this book will have been ultimately, it doesn't matter how critically acclaimed it could be, but if somebody reads it and thinks, I've got an idea, and I don't want to give a spoiler away, but
do something similar in Cedarville.
Yeah, do something similar. Then
these things are there. The factory exists. Am I correct? The factory that forms part of the book. It exists.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it really does exist. It really does exist.
Anybody with a few million, there are people. We can create a boy Petelu.
And you can use I'll give you the name with
pleasure.
There we
go. The naming rights are up for grabs. Anybody? There we go. Read the book. Read the book. It's
Yeah,
a.
yeah, yeah.
I'll help with the publicity, free of charge. I
Yeah,
promise.
no, me too. We can be part of the talent show at the opening,
Oh,
Izak.
absolutely, absolutely.
I'll
But that's,
juggle apples. I'll do anything.
I can't juggle apples to save my life, but I'll
Neither
take the
can I.
pictures. I'll take the pictures. There is, of course, something which brings me to the talent show. There is, of
Yes, yes,
course, boys at the age where not only do they start recognizing. You mentioned, people shooting upwards and growing up and
yes,
everything like
yes,
that.
yes.
Boy also begins as a boy does. And by the way, the boy here is BOI, just like in the skater song from that amazing pop star. But the boy notices a girl, and of course, at the talent show, when things ought to go absolutely right for him, because of truly South African transport reasons and even more sadly reasons, actually things go horribly wrong again
Again,
with a
yes,
girl,
yes,
which is
yes,
just. But please read the book. I mean,
yes.
again, there are no easy solutions in this book, and that's what makes it so beautiful. Sometimes you watch a nice Hollywood movie and you think, okay, it was a nice easy solution, but hell, that is so
Far from
unlikely.
my possibilities. Yeah.
This here, you just every time you think, okay, now boy's on the up, something knocks him down again, and then anyway, he gets up and it's beautiful. Yeah, I think I should stop ranting about the book. I think people should just read the book. It's would you perhaps want to share a few lines from the books or from the book
Yeah, let me
or something like
see.
that? I mean, it's
I can. I'll read something from the beginning, I think, because I don't want to give too much away.
I agree. I agree.
It's quite a tightly plotted book.
Oh, yes,
Everything
yes.
in it kind of, there's nothing that happens is there, just it all contributes towards, at the end, it must all kind of knit together.
Just as on that note, I do want to say something which is interesting. One of the reasons why I asked you about the book is actually there are 165 pages of stories, so it's a thickish book, but yet because of and of course there are the delightful Karen Vermeulen drawings, which we haven't talked about yet.
Are lovely.
But because the chapters are really short, I do think that even people who struggle to read will actually. You mentioned that. Was that a very much was that one of the reasons why? I mean, these are short, succinct little things that happen, and around each there's a chapter created and a little picture and everything like that. Is that how you saw it?
Well, it was deliberate. My main kind of motivation though was to write a good story. That kept you thinking, oh, how's this going to end? How on earth are you going to get out of this muddle?
Cliffhanger upon cliffhanger upon cliffhanger.
And then it's a disaster. So it's messy, and that's the kind of little engine that I wanted to start in the book, and so the chapters all revolve around either another little mess that he's made or a bit of relief. There's some sort of resolution, and so we kind of stagger through the book just with hopefully you don't see the end coming, because that's another thing
and that's why I don't want to give anything away, but
I like stories where I think somewhere on my website it says I like stories where you think you're going to be taught a lesson, but it bursts into song instead.
I like that. Okay,
and I love that. That this isn't a lesson in how to get rid of poverty or something. It's a song, really. It's how to kind of sing in spite of, and so
it's quite a silly song in many ways, but it's beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, so let me read you a little bit. So Boy's got the idea of the trading game, and now he's looking for something that he wants to start the process with, and he doesn't know what he doesn't even have a red paperclip. So he's looking around his house, and he comes across a traffic cone that it doesn't in fact belong to his father, it belongs to the municipality, but they're goofing around, the two boys in the house, and I stuck one of the traffic cones on my head and looked at my reflection in the shard of mirror that rests on the high ledge in my father's room. I'm tall for my age, 12, almost 13, so I can see my face easily, but Porto is short and has to jump to see his reflection. He put the bucket on his head and pushed me out of the way to see himself, but the bucket kept falling over his eyes, so he staggered around with his head in the bucket, banging into the cupboard and falling over the corner of the bed. When he barged into the kitchen, tin plates clattered to the floor and the pup pot fell off the stove. He was crashing about like this when my grandmother hobbled into the doorway again to see where all the noise was coming from. I thought there was a jackal loose in the house with all this noise. I should have known it would be Pete and Pozzo. Out you go, Hambani! And we ran past her in the doorway as she poked us with her walking stick. Sometimes when I make an unwelcome noise, my grandmother calls me Pete, after the bird, the peetmevrouw.
Yeah.
It's a type of cuckoo that only arrives for the summer, and on hot nights it calls all night long and keeps us awake. Peetmevrouw, peetmevrouw. My grandmother said when I was a baby, just as she'd be dropping off to sleep, I'd cry out like this cuckoo, and it drove her crazy. Where should we go? The shop, soccer field? Porto asked when we were on the road. No, I said, because I've got an idea. The river. I know what I'm going to make as my first trade. Porto laughed and shook his head. He knew what I was planning. That man in Canada who traded the red paperclip was crazy, but anyone who trades something for one of your clay animals is really mad in the head. He made spirals round his ears with his fingers. Project Paperclip, he he he, he laughed. But he came with me anyway.
Bravo. I think that's about the time where I should say I'm going to sign off and allow people to read the book, because it is available in South African shops now, and it is, as far as I know, it's available in the United States as well. So in
I think
fact,
in September
in
it'll
September,
be
shortly,
available in the USA. Yeah,
in the United States, yes. You are launching this book on the 12th of August, for those who see it before this interview before then. I hope you're going to have lots of fun there and lots of
thanks,
laughter.
Izak. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for chatting.
That was delightful. Thank you. So the book that we're talking about is The Cedarville Shop and the Wheelbarrow Swap by Bridget Krone. It is available in South African stores as of right now. The date was yesterday. And Bridget, thank you very much for chatting to us. And by the way, the other book that we mentioned, Small Mercies, in South Africa, is published by Walker Books. Am I correct? And in the
That's right.
United
Yes,
States,
yeah,
it is
distributed
published.
by Clan Macmillan.
There we
Yeah.
go. And in South Africa and in the United States, it's published by Catalyst Press, who's also the publishers of this delightful book. So yeah, there we go. I've just dropped it, like good old Potso and Pete would have done. Okay, I'm gonna say goodbye before I make more of a fool of myself. Thank you very much for chatting to me. Bye bye, Bridget.
Thanks, Izak. Bye.